Good afternoon, everyone that's just joined us. This is the Digital Dilemma, a session in which we'll be looking at the experiences of the past year or so and what the future holds for digital in museums. I apologise because I see some of the names popping up have attended other sessions, and I know I sound like an absolute broken record at this point. But if you did want to ask a question, pop it in the chat with your name and organisation, and we'll go through a Q&A at the end. And obviously, if you could just keep your mics muted while the speakers are on, that would be absolutely perfect. But in the interest of time, without further ado, I will hand over to Alessandro, who's going to speak to us first today.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you. So hello everybody. I'm Dr. Alessandro Merendino from Coventry University, Centre for Business in Society. And today I'm delighted and happy to present the findings of our report of our project co-authored by Professor Maureen Meadows from Coventry University. And this project is perfect from this talk because it's about the museum's the museum's sector, be digital to be strategic. And this project was an amazing opportunity to work with some of the museums in England. And then we want to scale it up more nationally, international. But let's see what this project is about. So we know that digital strategies should represent the cornerstone of every organizations, including the museums. But here we have an elephant in the room, which is COVID. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that digital strategies are paramount, are essential to guarantee the survival of any organization, including museums, because we know they had to close because of the lockdown. So the creative sector, including the museums, has the potential to build a powerful long-term blend of creativity and technology. However, there's a big however. Some museums still do not leverage the potential of digital. Still, you can see some amazing examples of museums leveraging digital and having a really solid digital strategies. Others not. And this is where we're coming from. So this project, we wanted to co-design for museums, with museums, digital strategies to help them survive, thrive, during and beyond the pandemic. So I was told by a colleague of mine, remember to give 3 messages. So the 3 messages that I want to give across, I will tell you now, the 3 takeaways. I know it's weird. And then I will tell you at the end. So I think they can be summarized by a word, cope. I was thinking of this word yesterday. I thought, oh, that works quite well because museums have to cope during this new normality. Cope, though, what it means, C for collaborations, OP for opportunities, and E for experimentation. So collaborations, what we found is collaborations are the key to unleash the digital potential, and partnerships with other museums and other organizations outside the sector, the creative sectors, are essential, vital to develop digital strategies. And here we are, and as researchers, happy to work with you to scale it up to help to implement these digital strategies. Opportunities, hope from cope, opportunities. So the pandemic, I know, is weird to say, but actually the pandemic has provided a great opportunities for museums to rethink, redesign, reignite their creativity. Is a great opportunity to reach new audiences in a new way. So it's a completely change of mindset. And then experimentation. What we found is experimentation, try and error, test and learn. These sorts of approaches are invaluable to create digital strategies. However, I will touch this point a bit later. But however, there's a fear of mistakes here, fear to make it wrong, that can pause some museums or some directors to go through digital. So what we found, so the project is divided into 3 phases. We wanted first to understand from the public what they think about the digital activities that museums have implemented. So we surveyed 2,100 people from all over the UK with the support of Ipsos Mori. And then based on these results, we ran some focus groups with some museums directors. So from the head of digital to the COO, from the chief marketing officer to the CEO. And with these focus groups online, of course, because it's digital, with this focus group, we wanted to investigate what they think about these results of the survey, if they challenge that, if they agree or do not agree, or what are the challenges for them. And then at the end, based on the result of the focus groups, we ran two strategic workshops with directors of museums. And here we applied a technique called scenario planning. So we wanted to, is a way to forecast the future and to discuss 4 different scenarios. So briefly, the survey, we published a report, which is here. It is, yes, always next to me, but it's available online as well. So I'm happy to give you the details where you can find all the information. Or, yeah, please feel free to drop an email. So what we found in the survey is that many people are not yet engaging with museums online. However, the majority who does so, or the majority of those who are engaging online, are very positive. That means that this is an opportunity for museums. Yes, there are not many people, but those people are really fully engaged, and so there's a possibility to maximize and to reach a wider audience. And people actually are quite happy to have both online, virtual, and physical at the same time. They're happy to have a choice, and they express their gratitude and their enthusiasm about the online activities, and they're happy to pay. Most of that, which is important. Most of the informant says that they were happy to donate or pay. And also they say, so why? One of the questions of the survey is, why do you think online activities are important? And usually they're for 4 reasons. One is for education purposes, one is for second learning skills, increasing knowledge, and for the mental well-being. Right, next stage. So we discussed these results. The survey goes a bit more in depth, but I can't discuss it every single detail at the moment. But so we discussed these results with the directors in the focus group. And few findings. One is, again, digital is about experimentation. You remember, it's one of the takeaways. But as I said, concerns around the dangers of making wrong or get it wrong or making mistakes seem to play a crucial role in limiting experimentation with digital activities. So some directors do not want to experiment, are too afraid. Some directors said digital is not free, or I'm quoting here, digital is not new. Actually, museums are doing it already in different ways, in different capacities. It's true. However, regardless of the level of adaptation or sophistication, digital is not just a nice to have, or it's not just optional. Actually, it's part of what museums do. And then there's the golden thread. I like this golden thread. So some museums reckon that digital is just for marketing. But in fact, what emerges that it's not. It is a golden thread that cuts across different departments. Finance, because you need a budget, operations, collection, curation, education, marketing, IT. So it's really a team effort with these digital strategies. I'm going to conclude now with a strategic workshop. So we had 4 scenarios. Again, in the report are quite explained in detail. So we had different 4 scenarios, and we explained and we talked through with the directors and of museums, and we discussed what they thought, which is the most likely, what's the less likely, the riskier. So a couple of things here. What it came really, one of the challenges, and then one of the possible strategies for the future, is developing digital literacy. That doesn't mean I need to learn how to use that software. Sometimes it's also about having the right attitude or the right mindset. Experimentation, this blocking. So some directors said, no, the board of trustee doesn't want to go that far. So it's a learning. So digital requires ongoing training, and is about capabilities. So this interesting one is to find a digital talent. So every museum could identify an expert or a lead who would be responsible for leveraging the benefits of digital transformation. So and then again, it was the digital is the strategy. So it's not a separate strategy. Digital is part really of the strategy. So just to conclude, for the three takeaways, they can be encapsulated or summarized in the word COPE: collaborations, opportunities, and experimentations. And as I said, COVID has given us a great opportunity to experiment a new way to do business, and to reach a wider audience, to reach people that can't go to the premises of museums, or people that are abroad and they can't come here in the UK, or people that are here in the UK but they can't go to a museum. So the opportunities that COVID has opened up seems to are set against the practical challenges for institutions. So collaborations, and we are here really to help and to scale up and to improve the digital strategies. And this is me in 10 minutes, 11 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alessandro. That was great. And obviously, as I said before, any questions for Alessandro or any of the other speakers, please pop them in the chat and we will come to them at the end. So we've gone through the research there very briefly that Alessandro has conducted, and now we'll move on to hearing from some museums and galleries. And first of all is a London venue which had probably an entirely unique experience of the pandemic. And to speak about that, this is Philip.
Thank you very much. Thanks, David, Anna, and Museum and Heritage for having me. I'm just going to share my screen, everyone, and check that's all working. So if you can just give me, no, that's not working. So bear with me a moment, sorry. How's that? Can you see that? Brilliant. Okay, so I am Philip Levine. I'm one of the co-curators and managers of the smallest gallery in Soho. And thanks, Alessandro, for talking. I think his takeaway points are quite helpful for us. The first one being opportunity, then collaboration and experiment. So you'll see this in a moment, but just to explain a brief overview and what happened to us during the pandemic. We were established in 2016 with the support of the garage Soho. This is us on the left-hand side. We're a historic shop front window which faces onto Dean Street in the heart of Soho, just off Old Compton Street. And our aim is to display artwork that captures people's attention on their journey through Soho, encourage them to stop, think, and be inspired. We do this by exhibiting free and engaging site-specific artwork with different artists. The works, this is quite an important point, are only to be viewed by people from the street, so you never need to go inside. And as I mentioned, I'm a co-curator with Andrea Costa, and we manage the space as well. So, what did we do during the pandemic? Well, because you could view things from the out, or view our artworks from the outside, the pandemic did not affect our method as a gallery, but it did obviously affect the fact that we didn't have the same footfall with people passing the gallery. London was dead. So we meet many artists and have many displays in development. And we were in conversation with one artist called James Taylor. He wanted to react with what was happening in the spring, summer of 2020. So in this sense, this is point 2, opportunity. And the main discussion, which I'm sure we're fully aware of, was expressing our anxiety and being trapped indoors. So there was also a reference point, which was that, if you didn't know about it, there was the global teddy bear hunt. Just to explain in brief, that people would stick their teddy bears in their window. And then when parents took their young children for walks, because that's all we could do during that specific time, they would spot and count how many bears they could see in the windows during their daily walks. So, collaboration. no, loads of businesses couldn't do much, especially in hospitality and entertainment. So we were very fortunate to reach out to a company called McAlpine, who put out gigantic inflatable figures. And as you can see, they lent us a giant inflatable teddy bear. That's James Taylor next to it, and it's over 10 feet long. So with that, James produced a piece called Capacity, where the bear inflated and deflated over the course of the day, giving reference to what I've mentioned of being trapped indoors during the pandemic with anxieties. And also we did paint, you can't see it there, but we painted the space blue like the NHS to give reference to that as well. And it was also a good backdrop to the yellow. As you can see, the bear changed positions throughout the day and even having an abstractness to it. So coming back to the point, the digital dilemma, did we find the perfect balance between in-person and online? Well, of course, there is an impact. The audience was not as vast because many could not walk to central London. And for that reason, James produced a film that we could reach out to a wider audience who could not visit. I'll play that to you in a moment. But in conclusion, sort of short and sweet of my presentation, we were able to bring together what we do in person and digitally online. So when people found out about our show, and this was through social media, they could watch the video, or if possible, visit us on their daily walks and have a form of culture for them to engage. And with that, it was probably a display that seemed to get one of the biggest reactions for our gallery, online and in person. And I'll now just play a short sort of 45-second part of the film for you, and hopefully you'll hear the sound as well.
If we're to control this virus, we must obey the rules on social distancing. We must have a world-beating system, shining the light of science on this invisible killer. We have the R below 1, between 0.5 and 0.9, but potentially only just below 1. Should work from home if you can, and only go to work if you must. Anyone who can't work from home should be actively encouraged to go to work. Avoid public transport if at all possible.
And I think that's a good short summary of everything that we do. So thank you very much. Smallest gallery in Soho, and as you saw, that was James Taylor.
That is perfect. Thank you so much. And now moving on from one of, if not the smallest gallery in London, move on to a slightly bigger one that some of you may have heard of. And Lawrence from the National Gallery is going to talk to you about their digital work.
Thanks, David. Yeah, just literally down the road. Hope everyone can hear me okay. Can I get a thumbs up, David? Just brilliant, okay. The joys of Bluetooth headphones. I hadn't seen that, Philip. That's a fantastic piece of work. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, one of the biggest, let me just do the share screen situation. Hopefully you'll all be able to see this. So yeah, digital dilemma. As David said, I'm Lawrence Chiles, head of digital at National Gallery. And as Philip's just done, I'm going to sort of do a little bit of a sort of walk through our COVID situation, our COVID story, and then lead on to some further thoughts about where we think that's taking us for the future, as we sort of all deal with the reality of digital and physical and what that means for us and how it's changed. So a little bit step back about how we reacted. I think as Philip just sort of intimated, oh sorry, David intimated at the very beginning, that people have had digital, various digital kind of scales in organizations. Ours was very lucky. We had a very good digital team that had benefited from a new strategy back in 2017, 2018. And when COVID hit, we were quite well prepared, probably more so than others in some respect. But what was lovely is to kind of think about how that would mean for what that mean for new formats, and how we would kind of use our content to sort of find some approaches that were really going to benefit the nation and to really help with what the situation was happening. So kind of make and create curated looks, our 5-minute meditations, which you can see there, were all approaches to how to change our productions, work out how we were actually going to make content in a new way, and bring sort of different elements of the gallery together in a new way to react and make content, something that Alessandro referred to at the beginning about collaboration. And it was a real exercise in bringing various strands of the gallery together in maybe ways that they didn't realize or hadn't really thought about previously. Another example is on the screen there as well, was also bringing people closer to the gallery still. So some elements of the gallery were, during the whole period of lockdown, able to get in from our conservation team. So bringing in some films and using the behind the scenes, which we know plays incredibly well with our audiences. It's something we've been building on for the last 2 years. Giving access to sort of behind the scenes, even though we were closed, really was successful in kind of, as you can see there, Larry, our head of conservation, being in the gallery working on painting still whilst we were during certain periods of lockdown. And that was fantastic to see the responses we got for all of that. Just to sort of give you an element and sky the numbers, because this is something that we've noticed obviously over the last 18 months, is that we've been able to benefit from lockdown, if there is a benefit in terms of our reach and our engagement. We already had some quite large numbers, but during this period runs up to sort of April last year to Christmas actually, so it has increased even more. But those sort of numbers are quite large scale, and so we're realising how we can use social media and how we can use those channels to really bring that reach and engagement. But other areas of the gallery which we were quite surprised by during COVID, which were maybe parts of digital that was sort of languishing. The image there at the top is a piece of work we did with Matterport about 3-4 years ago now, which was creating virtual tours of the gallery. And the press picked up on these during lockdown in the very first phase, and the visitor figures quadrupled during that phase. And it was quite interesting to see, even though what we felt was content which maybe didn't have a particular lifespan and was used in a particular way for maybe understanding your visit prior to visiting, actually people loved them because it reminded them of the gallery and they could have access. And so over the course of the last 18 months, we've been able to move to something which we're doing in the bottom one there, which is actually virtual creations of the gallery, more immersive, browser-based delivery of the gallery that are not actually photographic kind of recreations, stitched together real creations of the gallery itself, but are actual playful spaces that are sort of appropriations of the gallery, but still with our paintings. And I think using that model has been something we're going to experiment with a lot more. And we've been very, very pleased by the results in terms of how people have felt what this means for a digital and an online experience. And the project to really sort of say how we were dealing with COVID was Sensing the Unseen, Step into Goss Arts Adoration. It was a project that started before lockdown. It was a big, our next digital exhibition that we were working on off the back of Leonardo Experience and Masterpiece, which some of you may have seen. It was a very, very big ticketed show. This one was a free show and was taken on in a very different way. It was building in human-centered design as part of the process. It was working in a collaborative way, both with internal and external skill sets, whether that be animations artists or with sound artists, and a real sort of collaboration of skill sets coming on board for the project in its development right the way through, including working with over 70 members of the public as part of that process. COVID came along and really challenged that process, but what was really, really amazing was the fact that how we could bend and flex because of following that human-centered design approach, how we were working with those audiences. There was a challenge, adopting new ways to actually do workshops and to sort of continue with building the concepts, but we were lucky enough to be able to get to the point where we opened with the exhibition, but only for a week because then we closed again. But what we were able to do was to spin that off into a digital experience, a mobile first experience of the actual sound installation. So those who may hopefully have seen it, some who didn't. Predominantly a sound installation, an immersive sound installation in the gallery using gesture interfaces. But we spun that out into a mobile experience using the same artists to collaborate in a very, very rapid iteration process, which again was testing that kind of collaboration between the on-site and the off-site experience. And other things we trialed during lockdown was building up our tours, our sort of linear-based media tours, and our two big exhibitions, Artemisia and Titian, were really affected during lockdown. But this proved that there was a growing increase in audiences who really liked this type of tour, wanted to have access to it, and enabled us really to start exploring this idea of free and paid content. It comes with lots of considerations, lots of issues around IP, lots of issues about tax in certain countries, and thinking about, what's the other one I'm trying to think of? Gift aid, that was the other one. So there's lots of considerations about that type of content which we were working through, but what was great was being able to offer these experiences to people that were remote and to seeing what the consumption was for them. And that's really led to thinking about on-demand and how we're sort of approaching that. We very recently sort of launched an on-demand section, taking some of that content and really building on another area that has been incredibly successful, which is our education tours and our education events and our courses. It's been something that we launched in terms of events back in July, but then in terms of the courses back in September, they've been incredibly successful and really opened our eyes into how we might be able to do more of these type of courses, and really the commercial value of them, but also kind of how to engage with a broader audience that actually can't get into the gallery. So I'll stop sharing and just quickly finish up by sort of saying, well, where does this all lead us? I guess the first thing to say is that I don't think anyone knows yet where the perfect blend between the in-person and online really exists. We're all in a position of trial and error still, and scrabbling and being reactive. This is now the moment to plan and possibly take advantage of the difficult situation we've all faced. And I think Alessandro referred to that, spotting those opportunities and really sort of looking for those ways of experimenting. So whilst we're opening up, which we're currently going through at the moment, and can't wait to increase our capacities in the real world, the realities of travel, international and national, and visitor safety is still going to have to have a significant impact on our immediate future. But our digital audiences and significant growth, and whereas previously we may have done live and as live digital events from the gallery with good numbers, our online tours, events and courses have really opened us up to new audiences who previously would not have thought of engaging with us in this way. So if anything, what is becoming clear is there's probably two distinct audiences at the moment. With an eye on the future, there's a crossover between that physical gallery and where, as we do events in the physical gallery, where those sort of intersections can eventually happen. Our recently published strategic plan, which is online, 21 to 26, is entitled The National Gallery for the Nation, for the World. And digital growth is a key pillar. It's not a digital strategy in its own right, it does stretch across the whole organisation. And that means extending our content production into new formats with increased quality, converting people on our databases and beginning to offer greater personalised experiences. The aim is to produce different kinds of digital exhibitions and live virtual tours, whether that be new playful hangs of the example I gave earlier, or looking into the archives or recreations of past exhibitions perhaps. The virtual exhibition spaces will give us access to new meanings of live, whether in education courses or curators' talks. But we know that the attraction of the physical gallery in the live event is still extremely powerful, and we'll be looking to create events and experiences that can be delivered, as I say, for physical and remote audiences. And these formats will need to change. Zoom and PowerPoint, as I'm just delivering here, can only be sustained for so long. And so what kind of offer do we have, and what level of participation in the real and the virtual can we start to combine? We're hoping that this approach will see us creating productions from the gallery that combine live interviews, audience participation, pre-recorded films and short tours. Whether audiences come with us on this journey will be defined by how we understand their needs and can design experiences that ever more cross the divide between the physical and the digital. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Lawrence. And then if we just hand over to Katherine, who has another interesting experience of trying to get this blend between digital and in-person.
Hello everyone, sorry about that. The joys of being a small museum director means that 5 minutes before you're about to start talking about your digital project, someone calls up because they want to book a wedding. Yes, thank you. Thank you all so much for your time. So as I've said, I'm director of a very small museum, the Brunel Museum, and I'm going to talk a bit about some of the ways that we've sort of responded to the digital in-person dilemma, picking up on some of the things that Lawrence has said around two distinct audiences, but also thank you to Alessandro for giving me the COPE acronym, thinking about collaboration, opportunity and experimentation. I think I'm probably going to cover all of those. So like everyone, when the pandemic hit, my world shrunk to where I could travel to by my own 2 feet, but it also sort of expanded and could suddenly I could kind of engage in digital activity across the world, and I think that sort of dichotomy at the heart I think is really interesting for this sort of question. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that we did at the Brunel Museum. So just bear with me just a second while I share my screen. I can't see the bit where it says can hear my phone is ringing again. The fun of working at a small museum. You're just going to have to bear with me. I'm so sorry. Right. So with COVID came huge financial challenges, as lots of you will be aware of. We were no longer kind of getting people through the doors, but it also brought lots of opportunities to think about engaging audiences in a completely different way. So thanks, and again, this is the opportunity bit of engaging people in a different way, but also we were lucky enough to get cultural recovery funding from the Arts Council, which meant that we could do some experimenting, which is the E of the COPE. And we experimented with developing an online escape room, and the emphasis really was around generating income for the museum while we're closed, thinking about different ways of bringing income in, but also thinking about audience development, audience engagement, thinking about bringing in a different audience through digital engagement. We settled on the idea of an online escape room. It's another kind of interesting irony of the pandemic that, like museums, escape room sites are places that you are meant to go to physically and do things in those spaces, and they had to pivot to digital as well. So we're kind of both coming from similar places. And then the C obviously is in collaboration. So this project would not have worked had we not worked with an established escape room designers who had pivoted to digital and sort of done that really kind of engaging, been able to kind of deliver that in a really good way. So I'm just going to share with you the trailer that we produced for our online escape room so you can actually get a flavour of what we're talking about.
Listen, I know it's been ages, but I'm in a bit of a bind and I could use a bit of expert help.
I've got to fix it before everything my family has worked for collapses in on itself.
This is 1827. I know this is going to sound crazy. What if I've somehow travelled through time?
You must be my new assistant.
A mastermind in maid's clothing, eh? Can you even read? Really?
What do you think? Do you think I'll get away with it?
That will work well for the basket of death.
Basket of what? I've got another gig. It's called Getting the Wi-Fi Back Online. What the melon? Who knows what might have happened if I'd tried that on my own?
The Great Cryptid.
So Tunnelling Through Time, our online escape room adventure in collaboration with Deadlock Escape Rooms, launched in April of this year. So I'll talk a bit about the kind of COVID timings of that as well, and the impact that that's had. But since,
listen, I know.
Don't do that. Since launching, it's been played by 222 UK teams. It's been played by 68 international teams. Lawrence mentioned international tax. That's fun. Thinking about that for things like this, and 9 press teams. And actually, the number of international teams has actually increased since putting these stats together. So our kind of secondary aim with this was about audience development, about kind of bringing people into the museum, and really kind of taking the museum to them. And I think these stats sort of really show that. These are some lovely things that people have said to us. It's opened up a brand new audience for us. So escape room enthusiasts. So we've had loads of great reviews from Escape Master, Review the Room, lots of kind of specialist publications, but we've also been featured in Time Out. Again, you know, really nice feedback from a group of people who actually probably would never have come, never would have come to the Brunel Museum, never even heard of us, and now suddenly are aware of us and actually aware of our history. One of the real benefits of collaborating and working with, there was absolutely no way we had the technical resource in-house to do this. we were able to make these games because the team at Deadlocked are so good. And they kept putting in little kind of Easter eggs and things like this. And 24 hours before launch, they added Mr. Pokemon. So in one of the games that you can do for literally no reason other than because it's fun, there's a man that you can poke and just see what he says. So the average number of prods is 16. But someone actually prodded him 299 times to see if he would say anything different, how many different things he would say. 115 teams got through without any clues. So if you've not done an escape room before, if you get stuck on anything, you have the opportunity to kind of ask for clues. The average number of clues is 6. The maximum that we got was 114. So you get a real range of kind of abilities and skills doing these games. It's around 90 minutes, the average game time, which is what we aimed for. Fastest time was 27. That's people taking it really, really seriously. Slowest time, 6 hours and 50 minutes. I assume they only just sort of stopped off and went and had dinner halfway through the game. And you can see here that we had a real range of games. And again, that's the kind of benefit of collaboration. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the kind of impact of lockdown and unlocking, because we started working on this game in January of this year, when we were locked down, with the launch in April, when actually things were starting to unlock, which was a kind of interesting moment to test. You know, do people still want to do digital activities once the pubs open? And the answer is kind of. That sort of seems to be the answer that we're coming to. So you can see these are our sales. So you can see they were really high in April when we launched. If you remember, it was also cold and you could only go to the pub outside. In May, when that was still the case, sales dropped ever so slightly. But we're really, still really high. And then sort of June and July, we have seen a real dip, which we were absolutely expecting. We didn't think that we would get, really reach that many more people once kind of the sun came out and people were going to the pub again. But it's been a really interesting opportunity to kind of engage those audiences. Outside of the museum and internationally, which we absolutely wouldn't be able to do. So only time will tell if those international visits, will that translate into in-person visits? We will see. I also just wanted to kind of balance and come back to that point that Lawrence mentioned about actually the two different audiences. It's a very online, very digital audience for our virtual escape room. Very sort of and very international, and it can be played anywhere. We also have a remit to engage with our local community. So when we were able to reopen, we hosted a community open day, and I suppose one of my big takeaways is that kind of horses for courses, and not just kind of transplanting what you would do in person digitally, but thinking really carefully about sort of what you want to do digitally and what is possible. And you can sort of see how local our bookers were for that day. So it's a real kind of contrast to the people in Australia and Germany who are playing tunneling through time. So that is my that's my presentation, and now I have to try and work out how I stop sharing. There we go.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Katherine. So if we now head over to some questions that we have in the chat, I think some of them sort of cover a few things that have already been covered, but the first question comes from Tushar from Geo Digital Library in Mumbai, and he says, how do new institutes and museums approach already established museums and institutes for establishing collaborations for better exhibition opportunities on digital platforms? Don't know if anyone wants to go with that one first.
I'll jump in if you want me to. I'll probably jump in with a bit of a negative. I think actually collaborations across museums have been notoriously not very good, especially in the UK. I think it happens in certain areas in terms of research and things like that. But I think when maybe thinking about public-facing things, and that it's historically not that done. Maybe in the UK, I'm thinking of. But yeah, I think I'm not sure. It's an interesting idea, but I think it's something we do all have to consider even more, as we face a more digital future. And I think we're certainly looking and trying to sort of look at how we distribute our collection and what type of collection we make available for people to use, whether that's through data or whether it's direct collaborations. But I think that's something that museums and galleries could do a lot more about in terms of, it's an area that's been looked at and worked on for quite years in terms of open access. But I think that's something that's still really, really needed to start to bring those collaborations across museums.
If we can, sorry, if we can just add, based on our research, I completely agree with Laura's that that's one of the points that it's hard for museums to collaborate with other museums because of the fierce competition. Although there's a great concept, it's called ecosystem. So creating these museum ecosystems where museums help each other and share resources, and also, I listen in academia and in research, it's really a great concept that that foster collaborations also with other companies. So to reply to the question how to do so, yes, it's difficult. However, sometimes it can be as easy as an email or a phone call. It happens with in our project as well, where some museums collaborated just because by accident they just met on social media and said, oh, let's do something together. So yeah, sometimes serendipity is a great ingredient in that. But I agree, it's difficult, but not impossible actually, because we want that.
I'll just add, Alessandro, because you're exactly right. I think if you're thinking about formal collaborations, I think that can sometimes be hard. I think in terms of informal collaborations, I think the sector is incredibly brilliant at sharing and collaborating in that way, and it's so open. And I think conferences like this and other places, that's where the real sharing and collaboration happens. And I think that's happened a lot during lockdown, and we've all looked to each other to say, how can we support each other?
I think the one thing I would add, obviously, as someone who has no expertise in this, but based on the chat we had yesterday on our social media panel with someone from TikTok, or just feeding on from what you said, Alessandro, about the idea of this ecosystem, is that their algorithm, and I'm sure other algorithms on other social media platforms are set up the same, that when one museum is successful, that becomes like a museum strand, and then it directs people. So obviously people work together and build momentum across the sector. That could be very fruitful, I imagine. But as I say, I have no expertise or real understanding, so don't take too much notice of me. But I think if we move on to the next question, we have a two-part question from Sally at the Scottish Parliament. And the first part of the question is, have you seen a difference in the demographics of people engaging online versus the people engaging on sites?
Right, I think probably Sally is referring to the survey. Yes, so our demographics is quite balanced in the UK. So we tried to have a fair view of the 4 different countries and also North and South and East and West. So yes, so in the report there we don't go into the demographics. However, we noticed that especially people from the south of England tend to engage more on online activities rather than the north or even Scotland. So that could be a sure. But I'm happy, Sally, to go further with you and look at the stats that we have. Yeah. Hope it helps.
Thank you, Alessandro. Did any of the other three of you have any sort of, have you assessed the audiences that have maybe changed over the pandemic as digital has taken hold?
As I mentioned before, we had more reaction, but I wouldn't necessarily know audiences, but normally I can judge it by how many people live post or tweet or things like that. It definitely seemed to have been increased over time. But then the addedness with probably all of us is that people sort of want to come back to our institutions or our locations now that they're a little bit more free, so which is a positive for all of us.
I don't know, Lawrence, have you at the National Gallery had different demographics engaging over the past year?
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of we're in the thick of really we've done a number of surveys and things that we're just sort of going through now, and one, to assess kind of what's gone on, and two, to assess, we just literally one on this morning on the barriers to entry and kind of what people will be thinking as we start to reopen. And so it's all very, very fresh. I don't have anything specifics. I think I will. It's an interesting one in terms of our learning team, in terms of our courses. We're looking about where they go with the courses that have been, you know, super successful over lockdown. And a really interesting stat, I don't know if anyone else saw it, was there's an Ofcom report that basically said, you know, in that the area that we look at for those courses, it is our kind of 50+ audience, which you would argue is our traditional audience. But a really interesting stat within that is in that Ofcom report is that during lockdown, the proportion of UK homes without internet access fell from 11% to 6%, which might not seem huge, but that does signify for me that there is still a large slice of that audience that didn't even have internet access and now do, and have an opportunity in terms of courses and learning, you know, in terms of that broader reach for digital for adult courses and things. So I think that's where that change is quite significant. Even if it's still for your core audience, there's still a demographic there that are now even are online who weren't even online before. So that's significant.
And Katherine, I know you took over in the depths of the pandemic, but have you noticed any changes?
So in terms of on-site, when we reopened, we very deliberately looked to engage a different audience, a much more local audience to the museum, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that in our sort of you know, our Booker data where we have it, and kind of post-visit surveys. But as I kind of showed on that, even the community open day was even more local than our sort of, I suppose, our regular sort of weekend opening data. So that was a very deliberate thing about attempting to change the demographics of people visiting the site. But actually the big question is how does our online audience map onto our on-site audience? And we haven't got that information yet. And just to take the tunneling through time example, we don't have a great deal of data about who those individuals are beyond sort of how many UK teams and how many kind of overseas teams. We're not collecting that data in the same way. So it's very difficult to sort of to gauge, but the next step is assessing, actually, will this game lead to more visits on site? You know, will people who played the game go, oh, I'd really love to visit the Brunel Museum in person, which was a sort of secondary aim of the game. That we have yet to see. Obviously, international travel and even kind of quite a lot of UK-based travel isn't nearly at its kind of pre-COVID level. So it's a sort of wait and see for us.
Thank you for that, Katherine. And the second part of Sally's question is, she says that she's really interested in exploring how people are ensuring accessibility in their online experience, whether that's people with British Sign Language, they need that, or if they're visually impaired, for example, she says.
I'll talk very quickly about something we considered quite a lot with tunneling through time, because a lot of the games required you to match colours to each other. So colour blindness was something that we had to consider very, very carefully, and obviously making sure that we had subtitles on all of our videos. So thinking about the ways to make things most accessible is also, you know, it makes there's a business case for that, because if people can't play your game, they're not going to pay for it.
Yeah, it's the same for us. I think, yeah, it's just a strong focus of what we do with our online content, regardless. That's always super important. But I think with the Goss Art exhibition, the Sensing and Seeing, we did work with access consultants on that to make sure, because it was a different approach and it was using sound in a different way and kind of making sure that was embedded into the experience, and that extended to the mobile experience that we did as well.
I don't know if Philip, obviously the physical accessibility is slightly different at your site, isn't it? Because people don't have to go onto site, but is it something you've looked at digitally as well, accessibility?
In all honesty, no. It's not meant to be an excuse, but we give our time for free. So I think in the context of reviewing things going forward, it's something we should definitely take into consideration, but it's sort of the capability of doing that at this moment in time. I suppose that our latest display has a big sort of creature made of pebbles, and maybe at times we could probably bring different groups down that could feel the space at some point in the future, which would be something we should consider. But in the honest answer is, because we give our time for free, we don't necessarily have the resources to invest in that area as much.
Mm-hmm. And Alessandro?
Yes, so there was one of the questions of the survey about the implication of digital for people with impairment, and we found that digital actually helped them because of easier accessibility. So, for example, subtitles. Or visual, or just not be able to go out of the house because during the first lockdown they have to shield. So for all those people, digital was really the answer. So there's also interest from some research councils about this topic, how art meets health. It could be mental health or physical health, and digital is surely a parameter in between that can help the creativity of museums and the impaired people. And digital is mediating, as an academic word, is helping the relationship between health and creativity.
Thank you, Alessandro, for that. We've got a question specifically for Katherine next. And in the meantime, Alessandro, I just noticed at the bottom of the chat, someone asked if you could share the link to your research. Would you be able to pop that in the chat? Hopefully, Alessandro will be able to do that in a second.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat? I had the Wi-Fi connection went down. So
That's
I don't
fine.
know what's happened.
We've
that again.
We've just had someone ask if you could share the link to your research in the chat so people could go straight to look at that afterwards. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I will do now. Yeah, I will share also my email in case someone wants to be in contact with me. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. And this next question for Katherine from Genevieve from Museum of Richmond. She says, with tunneling through time, how did you go about pitching something that different and ambitious to stakeholders, especially when working with a short time scale?
So I will confess, Genevieve, that I was quite lucky in that I actually inherited the concept of the project. So the trustees were already on board with the idea of doing an online escape room. So that made things a bit easier. But what I had to do was write I wrote the brief, which I obviously shared with them, and then. And actually where it had come from was the fact that online escape rooms had become this kind of phenomenon during the first lockdown. So it seemed like a sort of sensible thing to do, worth kind of experimenting with. But just a little bit about the process. So it was such a short time scale. So I had to kind of write the brief incredibly quickly, which meant I had to open out, give quite a lot of creative freedom to the collaborators, which actually was brilliant, and it really worked out. So writing the brief was something that we did, bringing different stakeholders on board to actually assess the pitches was also a really helpful way of kind of keeping them on board. So one of our trustees assessed the different responses to the tender that we put out, again having to do this really quite quickly. And that was great. And then we eventually sort of had a really fantastic pitch that they put together. And again, it was just about making sure that the trustees got to see sort of the work in progress as we went along, so they weren't completely shocked by the final product that we ended up with. So yeah, so keeping them in the loop as we went along really helped, but also, you know, talking about the successes of other projects was helpful as well.
Great, thank you for that, Katherine. Alessandro, are you available to take a question? I'm sorry, I sent you off on that task.
No, that's yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Chloe asked, did you have any tips for encouraging experimentation in risk-adverse institutions?
Yes, change directors. No, I'm joking. Well, that's interesting because I'm a trustee of a charity not involved in museums, others, and I see that clash, and that clash was also emerged from the strategic workshops. So one of the tips is do believe in that, in experimentation, and do continue to persuade the other directors or trustees that this is the way. And one way is to show evidence that works, and show evidence of your own organization or other competitors. And the others is bringing evidence or bringing experts to show the directors, look, experimentation is the way forward. We need to make mistakes. We need to learn. Is okay. And one of the directors, it was involved in the strategic workshops. I love that. I'm using my life as well. Sometimes it's better to do something and then ask for forgiveness. Oh yes, I like that. So yeah, sometimes if you believe that it's the right thing to do it and then ask for forgiveness. But yeah, there are some tips. Sorry, I just dropped my email and I was able also to misspell my surname. How amazing is that? I rewrote my email address. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. I think we've been through all the questions in the chat, and I think we only have a couple of minutes left. One thing, I'd written a page of questions, but we do not have time for them. One thing I was going to ask is to do with the sort of monetization of digital experiences, because I know obviously Lawrence, you touched on the on-demand that National Gallery are now going to offer. And I just wondered all of your perspectives on how much in the future will probably become a thing that will have to be monetized in order to make it a reality. I know obviously in response to the pandemic, a lot of people rushed out free things to make sure they could engage, but how do you see that shift happening? I don't know if Lawrence, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, we're doing a lot of work to try and understand just the value of digital content or digital experiences, and I think that that's a new thing as part of the strategy. Really trying to understand that value, and across the three areas always we all talk about, which is reach, engagement, and the commercial side. And I think the reality is that I think in our previous strategic plan, which is up on the website as well, we were aiming for 50% self-funded, and that's obviously increased, and it will increase. And there are opportunities there, but also the sad reality is we need to. But I think audiences have come along with us on the journey, and I think the evidence is there to say that people are willing to pay for these sorts of things. And we got a lot of feedback from, for example, our Artemisia tour that we did, which we jumped into that and had to work pretty quickly to make that happen, really with the primary objective of knowing that it was a big show for us and it wasn't going to be able to be seen by a lot of people. And we experimented with that, and we experimented with the price point, and we've learned a lot. And to go back to the question that Alessandro just answered, talk to your audience, talk to the audience, because that's the evidence that you need. And the more you do that, the more you'll understand and be able to justify what you're doing.
Thank you, Lawrence. I don't know, Katherine, did you have anything on this?
Yeah, I mean, I started off by saying that the kind of primary aim of our project was income generation, which we needed to do because our income had disappeared overnight. And I think the thing that maybe gets missed in these conversations is actually the cost of digital. I think I think Alessandro gave the example of the director who said, well, digital's not free, and it's not free. And I think actually that's something to consider. It's actually what's the time that's going into the staff time, what resources do you need, how do you make something that's worth paying for? I think is really important to kind of consider. And what I'm kind of interested in, and I'd be interested to pick up with anyone on this offline, is that pay what you can model, or the donations model, because I do feel that there is something, I think there is something very powerful there in that idea of altruism and giving money forward rather than it being so transactional. I haven't developed my thinking on that beyond that, so I'd be really interested to hear from anyone in this, and I'll put my email in the chat if anyone wants to pick that conversation up.
Perfect. Thank you, Katherine. Philip, obviously, you said that you donate your time. I presume, obviously, a lot of things are done on a shoestring at the smallest gallery in Soho. So what was your perspective on this?
I mean, there's always the question of the value of culture, which we could go off on one for a long time. But there was mention of collaborations and things like that. I mean, I know of something that popped up called Art Browser TV, who I think are reaching out to very big institutions. I don't know if they're touching base with the National Gallery to get to a wider audience, and through that wider audience, maybe it can funnel through. But I mean, if people can pay for TV streaming services and things like that, why can't we believe that they would, as you say, otherwise don't give a paying amount of choice, or pay for something when we give it value, or connect to other collaborations in the sort of media world that filter into us as art institutions or art forms.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And Alessandro, did you want the last word?
Yes, so in the survey, as I said probably previously, we covered the question, would you be willing to pay or donate for digital activities? And people are really willing to donate money. We are doing another more sophisticated statistical analysis of the survey, not for the report, but for a scientific paper. What we do is that there's a really strong correlation between donation, not pay, donation, and digital engagement. So there's an interesting area. What some museums did, and it was really great to attract people, is to attract audience through social media for free, or direct audience through the website for free, and then drive them into some donation or paying schemes. It could be a digital scheme or whatever. So attract them for free and then let them donate or pay to engage on a really valuable digital area. But someone said, I'm not sure if the quality of my digital is good enough to get it good enough for let people pay. There's another problem. So but yes, so donation or paying is people are really willing to do so.
Thank you for that. It would be very interesting, I think, to see how many people who claim in a survey they would pay for digital experiences actually do, but that's probably a different conversation. But we have completely run out of time. So thank you so much to Philip, Lawrence, Katherine and Alessandro for giving your time to this discussion. It's been really interesting. One of my catchphrases during the summer series has been that this session has been recorded, and we will upload it in a couple of weeks' time so everyone can watch it back, and anyone who's going to watch it on demand, hello in the future. And that is it from us today. Thank you so much. Please feel free to join us on any sessions later today. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you again to the speakers.